There we go. Madam Chair, Mr. Platt, members of the committee, my name is Virginia Stallings, and as you've heard, I serve as chair on the Committee of Nutrition Standards for National School Lunch and Breakfast Programs that are under progression at the Institute of Medicine. We produced a Phase 1 report on the topic that came out in late 2008. We're currently working on Phase 2 that will provide recommendations for revisions to the nutrition standards and the menu requirements for the program. I also served as chair of the committee that prepared the 2007 report on foods in schools leading the way towards healthier youth that reviewed the scientific evidence and provided nutrition standards for snacks and other foods and beverages provided outside of the federally reimbursable meals and snack programs. These were mentioned this morning by Representative Woolsey and Castle. In 2008, at the request of the USDA, the IOM convened an expert committee to provide recommendations for updating the nutrition standards and meal requirements for the school lunch and breakfast programs. These are the nutrition and health foundations for these programs, and much has happened since the current standards were last updated in 1995. The school lunch program serves more than 30 million children each day, and the breakfast program serves about 10 million. Thus, improvements to the programs offer tremendous potential to improve the dietary intake and the health of children. Together, the two school meal programs can make a great impact because they may provide as much as 50% of a student's food and nutrition intake on school days. Also, as you know, depending on household income, a child may receive meals at no cost, at reduced cost, or full price. The program therefore serves as a safety net for children in need. The school lunch program was established in 1946 as a measure of national security to safeguard the health and the well-being of the nation's children. Then, most of the nutrition concerns in the United States were centered on deficiencies. Although many of the overt deficiencies have now been eliminated, other nutrition-related concerns have emerged. And as the chair mentioned, the most notable is the high prevalence of childhood obesity. Revisions of the current program standards will enable the programs to incorporate current public health recommendations and the newer knowledge about nutritional needs of children and adolescents, and what we now know about the impact of nutrition on health both in childhood and throughout the lifetime. Among the specific reasons for revising the standards are substantial changes in the dietary guidelines for Americans, which by law the school meal programs are required to follow. We also have major changes in the nutrient intake recommendation, and again, as mentioned, this is on a background of the increased prevalence of obesity. There are short and long-term health consequences that will follow this epidemic of childhood obesity. The USDA subsidized the cost through cash reimbursements, and in 2007, this was near $10 billion. Also, though, the USDA provides about $1 billion in the commodity foods programs. Commodity foods available to schools have changed dramatically over the years, and now states can choose from a list of more than 180 agricultural commodities, including many more fruits and vegetables. In Phase 1, the committee reviewed the task, formulated working principles, assessed the nutrient intake of school children, and described our planning model. The report was discussed in a public forum in January, and the committee expects to complete this report with full recommendations for new standards in this fall. I'd like to mention the 4 criteria that have guided this work. The nutrition standards and meal requirements will be consistent with current dietary guidance and nutrition recommendations to promote health. The ultimate goal is to improve children's diets by reducing the prevalence of both inadequate and excess intake of foods, nutrients, and calories. The nutrition standards and meal requirements will be developed based on age and grade groups that are consistent with the age and gender categories that are important to understanding child development and the recommendations. The recommendations will also support menus that offer nutritious foods and beverages that appeal to students. And lastly, the recommendations will be sensitive to cost. I'll highlight several examples very briefly just to illustrate how complex this process is going to be. With the 2004 Reauthorization Act of the Child Nutrition and WIC program, schools were required to follow the dietary guidelines, which means increase fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and low-fat and fat-free dairy. However, in this setting, there were not specific enough requirements for schools to implement this. Currently, the USDA has two different programs that allow schools to plan meals, one based on food, one based on nutrients. And the number of servings and the requirements for servings of fruits and vegetables are not the same in both programs. The definition of whole grain products, which we now know are important to health, will be considered. In the marketplace, most foods that have whole grains represent mixtures. The term whole grain and the serving size for whole grain are not yet defined by the FDA. So schools are in an awkward position of being given recommendations but not have definitions as to how to follow compliance. Recommendations along these lines will help both industry and the food service community. Dietary guidelines include recommendations for sodium, cholesterol, fiber, and trans fat. Again, not all of the current recommendations follow the science or the current dietary recommendation intakes. By law, the dietary guidelines must be reviewed every 5 years, and in fact, this process has just begun, and there will be new guidelines in 2010. We need to have a way that these constant and important updates can be accommodated into ongoing changes in the regulations for school foods at lunch and breakfast. Incorporating the standards, I think I'll skip that in the interest of time. Specifying the issue of age and grade groups is very important. Nutrition and energy needs differ by age, and as children grow over, both by gender and age. The current DRI age groups differ from the USDA age groups, so again, we need to harmonize these things. This is particularly true when you think about energy levels and calories as we think about issues of obesity. Energy needs differ by age, by physical activity, by body size, and when you think about kindergarten to 12th grade, you can appreciate how vast that range is. It may be appropriate to provide recommendations both for minimum and maximum energy levels in recognition of the concerns about both undernutrition and obesity in school-age children. In conclusion, the National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program have a long and impressive history of providing nutritious, low-cost meals to school-age children. There have been major developments in diet and health guidance and scientific understanding since the last revisions were made. It's now time to develop new recommendations so that school meals and the programs that they represent can achieve greater benefit for our nation's children. With the recommendations for competitive and snack foods, which came out last year, and the recommendations to revise the WIC food basket, which came out shortly before that, we have the unprecedented opportunity to use evidence-based and public health evidence to directly improve the dietary intake of children and positively impact child health. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Sterling. Ms. Copperman?
Chairwoman McCarthy and members of the Subcommittee on Healthy Families and Communities, I am Nancy Copperman, Director of Public Health Initiatives of the North Shore LIJ Health System, the 10th largest not-for-profit health system in the nation that serves the 5.4 million residents in the New York metropolitan area. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to discuss the importance of implementing and monitoring physical activity goals of the local wellness policy requirement. I would like to present some data in support of increasing physical activity in schools, the barriers that prevent the implementation of physical activity goals, and discuss a school-based wellness program, ActivityWorks, that addresses the needs of and the obstacles to implementing these policies. Over 33% of U.S. elementary school children are overweight or obese. Increased body mass index in children has been linked to reduced physical activity. Physical activity guidelines state that children should engage in 60 minutes of activity daily. National surveys of activity patterns indicate that less than 50% of children meet this goal. The 2006 School Health Policies and Programs study indicates that only 3% of elementary schools provided daily physical education or its equivalent, and only 13% of elementary schools provided physical education at least 3 days per week. A recent audit of the New York State elementary schools' compliance with physical education regulations found that students in 18 of the 20 sample districts did not meet minimum requirements of daily physical education and a weekly total of 120 minutes. Students were provided only 48% of the required daily classes and 72% of the required class time. School districts cited the following reasons for failing to meet recommendations: increased academic standards, requirements, and testing, lack of physical education staff, and inadequate facilities and space. A local wellness policy includes goals for physical activity that are designed to supplement established physical education programs but not replace them. School districts have been compliant in formulating physical activity goals. However, there is very limited data on the implementation and monitoring of these goals. School wellness committees have reported that lack of resources such as staff, programs, facilities impact on the achievement of these goals. In 2007, the health system partnered with schools to develop the Activity Work program, which focuses on increasing children's daily physical activity through an integrated classroom approach to meet the needs of wellness policies and physical education requirements. It is a community benefit program of the health system with additional support from a community building grant from Bank of America and the in-kind resources for the pilot program from 5 Long Island school districts. The program was developed using feedback from an 8-month discovery process led by the health system and a work group of parents, educators, administrators, public health, and healthcare professionals. The process included a review of best practices and obesity prevention recommendations, as well as group discussions regarding how to develop a successful school-based wellness program. The stakeholders felt that the initiative should be school-based, measurable, sustainable, scalable, and simple. The Activity Works program is unique because it integrates subject matter, math, science, language arts, social studies, health, art, and music with an exercise physiologist design, beat per minute exercise protocol. The CDs and DVDs contain 10-minute segments with original music and activities choreographed to the protocol. The program is easily implemented by a classroom teacher who simply loads the CD or DVD into a player, and the audio and or video directs the class exercise program. The students learn while they exercise. The physical education staff supervise its use throughout the academic year. Student calendars and sticker rewards offer positive behavior reinforcement. Parent newsletters bring the program's healthy lifestyle messages home to families. 5 New York school districts, 30 classes, and over 1,000 students participate in Activity Works. Program feedback has been extremely positive. Administrator and educator comments include improvement in student attention span, listening skills, behavior, fitness, and knowledge. Student feedback says the program is fun, interesting, and the music and exercises are cool. Parents and their children feel their children are more healthy and active. The program has been incorporated into the physical education curriculum of 3 school districts and provides an additional 50 minutes of physical education per week, increasing daily activity without increasing staffing and space needs. It is used as a morning assembly and indoor recess program, along with the parent newsletters, enables the schools to meet their wellness policy physical activity goals. An evaluation study is also being conducted to assess the program's effectiveness in obesity prevention, improvement in students' self-concept and physical activity, and ease of classroom implementation. In order for wellness policy to be effective in promoting healthy lifestyles and prevent obesity, it must address physical activity as well as diet. However, the support for implementing and monitoring of the physical activity goals has been sparse. Schools encounter barriers of limited space, time, equipment, programs, and trained staff to achieve these goals. Physical activity programs that are designed to be integrated into existing curriculums using existing space and involve community partners, parents, and school staff need to be developed and supported. Activity Works is an example of one such innovative program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Felton?
Thank you. Chairwoman McCarthy, Ranking Member Platt, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Reginald Felton, Director of Federal Relations for the National School Boards Association. Representing the nation's nearly 15,000 local school districts and over 95,000 local school board members through our state school boards associations, we wish to thank you for the opportunity to address the committee on this important issue affecting children enrolled in our public schools. Without question, NSBA believes that child nutrition is vitally important to fostering a healthy and positive learning environment for children to achieve their full potential, and that includes efforts to prevent childhood obesity. We believe that improving health requires the commitment of all of us in our communities, including families, government, employers, and local schools. Therefore, local school boards across the nation continue to actively promote nutrition education, physical education, and obesity prevention. As an organization, we want you to know that through our School Health Programs Department, we help school policymakers and educators make informed decisions about health issues affecting the academic achievement and healthy development of students and the effective operations of schools. Services are provided with and through NSBA's member state associations in partnership with other national organizations such as the National Association of State Boards of Education, the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and Action for Healthy Kids. Additionally, NSBA is very proud of its efforts to promote nutrition in the schools and to prevent childhood obesity through web-based services, educational programming, and publications. A summary of our efforts is provided as an appendix to our statement. In addition to the work of our own organization, local school boards are engaging their communities through partnerships and coalitions to ensure that all facets of the community are more informed regarding both the value and cost savings associated with improved nutrition. We're convinced that local communities and states are assuming greater responsibility for the health and well-being of its residents, and very much appreciate the strong support of the federal government through incentives and grants that enable school districts and local communities to further expand their local commitment and energy. We know that educating children as to the healthy behavior is most important if we're to ensure sustained changes in nutritional habits. As you prepare for the reauthorization of the Child Nutrition Act, we urge you to increase and expand those incentives and grants that will garner solid buy-in and commitment on the part of local communities, rather than to establish broader mandates beyond the current federally subsidized food programs. We appreciate your concern to improve nutrition, but we are very much concerned with the unintended consequences that are beyond the control of our local schools. We remain concerned that the behavioral changes that you desire and expect through expanded federal mandates and restrictions beyond currently federally subsidized programs may not be achieved. We believe that there would be significant increases in the purchases beyond the school grounds, particularly where high school students are permitted to leave the campus. Secondly, we believe that increased regulatory disagreements in schools over what foods and beverages should and should not be sold as new products are developed and marketed using newly developed food substitutes. And thirdly, we believe that there will be increased misunderstandings and complaints from parents regarding the banning of certain foods. Additionally, local school boards view federal efforts to regulate or codify into the statute the types of foods and beverages that can and cannot be sold at school events, particularly all those school-sponsored activities, as intrusive and burdensome on school districts. Such efforts, we believe, would dismiss the work of wellness councils and usurp the jurisdiction of local school boards to create a policy that reflects the values and capabilities of local communities. Therefore, NSBA urges you to reconsider any efforts to enact expanded legislation. Beyond the concerns over the operational impact of such expanded restrictions, local school boards are also concerned with the potential impact on local budgets and revenue streams beyond the vending machines. As you're aware, the expansion of such federal restrictions on all food and beverages beyond the vending machines could substantially reduce revenues that local schools need to support athletic programs and other activities. As examples, based on the literal interpretation of the language in the proposed bill, local catering businesses desiring to provide financial support to schools would be allowed to provide to students food products not meeting federal standards, but would be prohibited from selling those same standards to the same students. Or a school sponsoring a field trip out of town could find itself in non-compliance because some of the food products available to the students in their travels might not fully meet federal standards. As you can see from these two examples, such restrictions could result in enormous challenges for our local school officials. A national vision for child nutrition is indeed needed, but that should not convey nor equate to federal mandates. In closing, we want to reiterate that local school boards are committed to improving child nutrition and preventing obesity, and we clearly view wellness policies as important. We are very committed to changing attitudes and sustaining positive behavior related to nutrition. Therefore, we feel that community-based decisions are much more effective in the long run than mandates from the federal government. Federal mandates on our public schools should not be the vehicle for changes in society. In our view, federal mandates on what is sold in all school-sponsored activities is far beyond what is needed or should be adopted. We look forward to working with you as you approach the reauthorization, and again, thank you for the opportunity to come.
Thank you. Ms. Byrnes, I'm sorry that you had to wear whatever you're wearing all this time. Hope you're going to demonstrate what that is.
I will demonstrate, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm thrilled to finally find where everyone was. First of all, I wanted to share with everyone that no goal in life is possible without one's health. In 1988, I quit my job as an emergency department nurse. Professionally and personally, I had witnessed physical and emotional suffering of patients and families due to unhealthy lifestyle choices. I made a new life goal to keep people well. In 1989, with support from hundreds of dedicated business professionals, healthcare providers, educators, parents, and organizations that sustain our communities every day, the Central PA Health Education Center was incorporated as a 501c3. In 1995, after 6 years of planning and preparation, the bright red doors of the newly dedicated and renamed Susan P. Byrnes Health Education Center were opened to the children and citizens of Central Pennsylvania and Northern Maryland. What began as 2 teaching theaters in a refurbished downtown historic car dealership site has blossomed into today's 20,000 square foot home with 5 teaching theaters, over $1.5 million of interactive exhibits, and over 50 specialized educational offerings that include regional outreach programs to children and students and teachers in 7 counties. In addition to this, children and teachers throughout the United States, and indeed internationally, over 168 countries log on to our e-learning site. We have 95,000 international members that log on to learn about health on our website. All 50 programs at the Byrnes Health Education Center meet state and national guidelines. Our nutrition and fitness programs are offered as an integrated series that empower students to adopt healthier lifestyles. In our for pre-K and kindergarten students, we offer the Inside Story. Grade 2, Fueling My Special Body. Grade 3, Let's Get Physical. Grade 4, Just Fueling Around. Grade 5, Healthy Hearts. Grade 6, Fat, What's Up With That? And I'll get to that. And grade 8, Extreme Makeover. How do schools come to the Byrnes Health Education Center? If you were a 5th grade teacher, you would look at our program guide. We have over 50 programs listed here. You would look and you would see what you are teaching in your classroom. You would come for 1 or 2 programs. You'd get on your school bus and you'd come to the Byrnes Health Education Center. If you couldn't afford to do that, we have outreach programs. And if you couldn't afford to do that, that's where we have our free website called learntobehealthy.org. What we have in our teaching theaters, if you would come to our theaters, we have enthusiastic educators that teach with our larger-than-life interactive exhibits. They incorporate the wow factor and the fun factor into health education. We believe that students learn by seeing, hearing, and doing, and the students are involved in the educational activities. What I'd like to do is demonstrate, this is one of our least expensive exhibits. This is 20 to 25 to 30 pounds of fat, we're not sure. But why I brought this is for every pound of fat that we put on our bodies, our bodies have to produce 200 miles of blood vessels to nourish that fat. That's what these little red things are. Those are the blood vessels that nourish fat. So if you put on 20 extra pounds, you're putting on 4,000 miles of blood vessels that your little heart that weighs less than a pound has to now pump through. And if those vessels become filled with fat, imagine what happens to this little heart that has to pump through. Normally, we have 60,000 miles of blood vessels. The kids actually put this on, and then we ask them to run and or to do jumping jacks. And what we're trying to show them is, we're trying to give them information so that they will continue to make healthy choices. When Dr. Oz came to our Health Education Center this past October, he was teaching a heart-healthy program with our little ones. And he looked at me and he said, "Why doesn't every community have a health education center?" And I said, well, in fact, 34 communities in this nation have health education centers in 22 states, and we reach 10,000 school districts. And every year, 3.7 million students are educated in health education centers. However, the National Coalition at Healthcare says that in 2009, the United States is going to spend $2.9 trillion on disease. So it's time to turn the corner, and I'm here, thanks to Todd, to say to you that every community can have a health education center. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Rachel?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Congressman Platts, and members of the committee. My name is Lorrene Ritchie, and I'm the Director of Research at UC Berkeley's Dr. Robert C. and Veronica Atkins Center for Weight and Health. The Center for Weight and Health is one of the only obesity prevention research centers in the nation to focus primarily on environmental and policy solutions to preventing pediatric overweight. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input on the reauthorization of the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, particularly in regards to preventing child obesity. The WIC program offers us an unparalleled opportunity to prevent the development of nutrition-related health problems at the most critical stages of life, during pregnancy, postpartum, breastfeeding, and in early childhood and infancy. As you've heard today, it is critical too, because child obesity oftentimes begins very early in life. Obesity prevention strategies must therefore begin at a very, very young age. We have a golden opportunity here to position federal child nutrition programs to prevent obesity, and if we do not, this generation of children may be the first in our nation's history to live a shorter life than their parents. I offer the following 4 suggestions for strengthening WIC nutrition services to better address child obesity. My first recommendation is to increase time for nutrition education in WIC. Making healthful choices for one's family requires a knowledge base, yet many parents have minimal or no education in nutrition. I myself had to go to graduate school before I learned what to eat. Optimal nutrition education requires sufficient time at WIC appointments. How can this be achieved? First, ensure that there is adequate funding for the nutrition services and administration portion of the WIC appropriation. Second, redirect time from time-consuming processes like certification activities to education. Currently, states have the option to certify infants and breastfeeding women for 1 year at a time. However, the eligibility period for children, who make up half to 2/3 of those enrolled in WIC, remains every 6 months. Allowing annual certification for children would allow WIC staff to redirect their focus from paperwork to the provision of much-needed guidance on obesity prevention. My second recommendation is to increase targeted funding for breastfeeding promotion. The values of breastfeeding are numerous and well documented in the scientific literature. Breastfeeding not only reduces infectious disease and chronic disease, but it also helps reduce the risk of obesity. WIC is a proven national leader in breastfeeding promotion. In California, for example, rates of breastfeeding have increased by as much as 11% in WIC agencies that have implemented the Breastfeeding Peer Counseling Program with special funds appropriated by Congress. Evaluation of this peer counseling is important so that we can identify ways to adapt it to different populations and different settings. Yet funds are currently not allocated for evaluation purposes. Moreover, current funding for peer counseling is not adequate to ensure that all WIC mothers who need it get it. My third recommendation is to coordinate nutrition messaging across federal nutrition assistance programs. Among the child nutrition programs, WIC is the leader in nutrition education. A key way to strengthen WIC is to align the nutrition messages in all federal food programs, particularly the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Child Care Food Program, which serve similar populations. Without this, WIC messages are more likely to get diluted and lost in what you know is the daily barrage of alternative messages we more oftentimes hear for less nutritious foods. My fourth and final recommendation is to increase funding to support WIC evaluation and outcomes research. To ensure that WIC continues to provide the most nutritious packages of foods possible within its budgetary constraints, Congress should protect the scientific integrity of the new food packages and require periodic reassessments. The WIC food packages should be reevaluated at a minimum of every 10 years to reflect important changes in what we know about science and nutrition and updates in the National Nutrition Guidelines. Lastly, I urge you to increase funding for evaluations that will help us build the evidence base for cost-effective and transferable WIC best practices that demonstrate promise in preventing obesity. We need to discard what isn't working and strive to optimize the return from WIC's proven investment in nutrition services for the millions of at-risk families with young children who participate in WIC. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you these comments on strategies to strengthen the invaluable WIC program.
Thank you very much for that insight. We appreciate that, and we heard a few recommendations that you wanted. We're going to start our round. We're going to start our round of questionings. My first question will go to Mrs. Copperman. I wanted to commend you for the work that you have been doing, especially in my district. I understand you have the Activity Works program in several of the schools, Roosevelt, Westbury, those are part of my district. I've seen a number of the letters from the children that have been sent to me and how they're thrilled with the activity program. For example, one student named Ramona Robinson says, this school year our class began a new exercise program called Activity Works. It is a quick, fun way for us to get up and move. We are exercising, but it doesn't feel like it. I have about 10 student letters and would like unanimous consent to submit these letters for the record. Hearing no objections, so ordered. As I understand it, the program is used by children in first, second, and third grade. What made you target that age group?
We started with that age group as a pilot study because we felt that kindergarten children had special needs that were very different than 1 through 3 or 1 through 4 as far as the curriculum and the physical activity that they could accomplish in the classroom. So we decided to target that age group because we could reach more children, and we knew that these children were not meeting their physical education requirements as well as the physical activity goals of their wellness policies.
Was some of the issues that Mr. Felton brought up, that the concern that it might cost the school money, time-wise and everything else, how would you answer him those questions?
Well, one of the things that we did is we talked to the schools and worked with them in designing this within the budgetary constraints that they had. So that's how we came up with the program that would be delivered by the classroom teacher and supervised by the physical education teacher, so that the schools would not need to devote space or extra staff. And the program itself basically costs about $16 per child per year. So it's fairly cost effective for the amount of activity as well as regulations that it fits. So that was one of the reasons why we developed the program in the way we did and piloted to show that it can be integrated into a curriculum and that it is feasible before we went out and then said, here's a program that's available to schools.
You said that Bank of America basically was involved in working with you on the program. Was that developing the program, or was that helping possibly the schools?
We applied for a community building grant from Bank of America, and that helped us with the production costs of the DVDs and CDs so that we would have a product that was appropriate for children and that captured their interest, because our students now are very sophisticated by the type of videos that they watch. So we wanted something, and audios they hear, we wanted something that was of equal caliber so that it would pique their interest and would be successful. And that's how Bank of America helped us.
Just one final question to you is that with the data that you're collecting, what kind of results are you seeing? Do you have any hard data?
Okay, we started collecting the data in the beginning of the school year, and currently now we're collecting the follow-up. The data that I do have that's hard is that the teachers are using this program 4 to 5 times a week on their own. So that's number one, and kids are getting daily physical activity. The teachers and the educators report that their classes are more active or more interested in learning and are doing better as they see from a subjective point of view. The things that we're collecting are BMIs. We want to look at prevalence. We don't expect to see a decrease in necessarily obesity rates, but what we hope to see is a prevalence leveling. This is just one component of a program. I think that you also have to look at comprehensive other measures as policies and environmental changes. The other thing that we're looking at is self-concept, the idea of how kids look at themselves and how they feel about themselves, and is that improved by this type of program. And as I said before, 3 out of the 5 school districts so far have integrated this into their curriculum, which shows sustainability, which was a major factor that the schools were worried about. And we're hopefully working with other school districts in New York State, and we'd like nationally to show this as a solution to meet their physical education requirements and prevent obesity by daily physical activity and meet the CDC goal of 60 minutes of physical activity per day.
You know, obviously, you know, I'm very interested in this type of program, and obviously, we're probably going to need a little more data as it goes on. So certainly would appreciate any data as you go down further in the testing and everything.
Yes, I will send it.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask Dr. Virginia, I have time, Stallings, you recommended specific nutrients to be covered within the nutrition standards. Can you give us some specific areas that you want to go into?
Well, as you know, the committee is still actively deliberating, so I am limited about what I can talk about, but those will be part of the recommendations this fall. The nutrients that I did mention are the ones that are on the old recommendation, and then as we go to the dietary guidelines and the review of the nutrient intake requirements, comparing that with what children are eating today from our most recent data, what we find is the younger children are doing pretty well with getting enough nutrients, and actually elementary school children, and all of this is in the phase 1 report, are doing better with not getting too many calories. As you go to middle school and high school, you see physical activity go down and energy requirements thus go down, and the food intake is not going down with that. Lastly, the thing we learned as we go into high school, and particularly for the adolescent females, many micronutrients are being consumed at rates that would be considered inadequate. So as you look across the board, the vitamin E, the vitamin A, certainly fiber. So we are able to use that as our background. But it is very important, and that's part of the work of this committee, is to look across the different ages, because there's a lot of change in both developmental needs and food intake patterns as you go from being kindergartner to a high schooler. The other part of this is looking at things that they're too much of, and that from the evidence we have now is saturated fat and calories as the primary pieces to that, and sodium, should mention sodium. So those will be nutrients of special consideration in the follow-up report.
Thank you. Mr. Platts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of our witnesses here today for taking time, and I know the chairwoman and I both share our regrets in the amount of time you've had to spend, and that's just Murphy's Law with the vote schedule around here, and especially here where we had the motion to recommit, which adds about a half hour to that last series. So your patience is greatly appreciated, and your focus on this issue, both as elected officials or the spouse, First Lady of the state of New York. My wife's from outside of Buffalo. My father-in-law is now passed on, but my mother-in-law is still in the town of Williamsville. And so New York is kind of my second home now, as we're back and forth regularly. And to all of our witnesses, your input. You know, I look at this issue as a member of Congress, but again, as a dad of a 6th grader and 4th grader. I'm regularly in my children's schools, and the most regular visit I make is to have lunch at their schools. From when they were in kindergarten to my 6th grader middle school still invites me to come in, which is, yeah, how long that'll last, I don't know. And it's interesting when I sit in lunch, and we have, you know, the card system where they, you know, we can regulate as a parent what they're allowed to buy in addition to the main meal, which is a very good empowerment for parents so that you can have some say in what your children are eating. And we do have a responsibility. So as a parent, I'm grateful for what each of you are doing in your respective lines of work on this issue. Susie, I'm going to start with you, and because your story in York is just such a wonderful one. And I think one of the successes of the center has been the ability that you've reached out and all the staff at the center in partnering with our local schools. Do you want to touch on how that's came to be and the buy-in that you've had, which has been so important to the number of students that you've been able to reach?
Well, I learned very early on you want to start from the top, which are the superintendents, but also with the teachers and the parents as well, and the school boards as well. So but from the very beginning, we got the superintendents and the teachers on our board of directors, if you will, and then we've just kept them very close to us. We've also involved them in our curriculum, and as I stated, all of our programs are tied to state and national health education guidelines. The other thing we did is I just visited. We are a regional center, so we are in 7 counties. But we went out and we visited with all the superintendents in our county, which happened to be 16, and they all just were singing the praises that came up from their teachers after they've been to programs at the Health Education Center. So really the programs and the curriculum really does sell itself. But the thing that makes the Health Education Center so unique are our educators. And with the exhibits, with the $1.5 million worth of exhibit and our educators, we make learning about the body fun and exciting for both students, the parents that are visiting, and then also, of course, the teachers. So we keep that ongoing dialogue with the schools. And believe me, the only reason that more schools aren't coming, we see about 60,000 kids a year, is due to money.
Yep. Well, I can vouch for your educators. The last program I attended with my 6th grader was diversity education, which was outstanding, and then the drug prevention, and the educators in both were really wonderful. The kids and the adults all left thinking, wow, you know, it was great. And we want you to keep up that great job for our local community and have that emulated elsewhere. Certainly, as we referenced, just 22 states. We have, you know, a few more to go.
A few more.
Dr. Ritchie, I wanted to touch on you hit on something that I really appreciate in the WIC program, the issue of breastfeeding. You know, I'm blessed with an incredible wife who, with both of our children, breastfed both of them, even to the point where when she went back to work at about 10-month-old, when our first son was 10 months old, for about 8 months or so before coming home, she would pump at work and bag the milk for later use. And when TJ would go with me to the state capitol, I was in the State House, I would take frozen milk with me so that, you know, his diet was breast milk. I got a lot of looks when I was in the men's room thawing out, breast milk. So, but through Leslie, I learned the extreme importance of this. You reference in your testimony about the peer counseling program and how there's so many not able to participate. Do you have any data of what percentage, when you talk about the importance of additional funding for this program, of how many we are reaching as a percentage, and so how how big is the challenge from a funding standpoint?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer that question completely, but what I do know is that only a small minority of women have access to the peer counseling program. So what that means is that this very effective and proven program is not getting to many of the women who could use it.
Yeah.
And what we see instead is that a lot of women, for example, when they have their baby in the hospital, they are sent home with coupons, they are sent home with a bag full of formula. There's a lot of things that set them up to fail in breastfeeding. And yet if they can reach out and be engaged with somebody who they can relate to, who has had those same experiences like your wife and has gone through pumping and storing and all of the things that go into nursing, they can be empowered to overcome the other obstacles that they have in their life. So I can't give you the exact statistics on how many WIC sites participate in the breastfeeding peer counseling program, but what I can tell you is that it is highly effective and that we need to do more to get other women that program.
Yeah, I know my time's expired. I see it in a similar way with, we have such data with brain development, 0 to 3, and 85% of brain neurons and stimulation of the brain. This is in that same, if we can make that investment at the very beginning, the first hours and beyond with breastfeeding, that immunity system and everything is so much healthier for the rest of their lives.
It's the perfect nutritious food plus
Yep.
the added benefit of the fact that the scientific literature supports that it reduces risk of obesity later in life, not even during when the child is
Yeah, I
breastfeeding.
appreciate your highlighting that, something that we definitely take a look at as part of the reauthorization.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. Kim, who is here on the committee, worked with me in my office on educational needs, and she had triplets and then, not triplets, twins, and then another baby soon after that. But anyway, we actually have started here in Congress where we're going to have a nursing room because so many of the members of Congress, believe it or not, are having babies. We just had a friend of ours, a colleague, have a baby yesterday, and most of them all breastfeeding. And I'd like to think because of this committee, we have educated more and more people that breastfeeding is an important feature. Mr. Tonkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say I've been sitting here trying to calculate how many additional miles of blood vessels I might have created in my activities. My first question would be to First Lady Paterson about the Healthy Steps to Albany campaign. And can you just discuss, maybe develop further for us, please, Michele, the success that has been driven by this whole effort?
Well, when I started the program about 2 years ago in Harlem, and we had some of the winners come to the mansion for the healthy lunch, the kids got up and they talked about their experience in the contest, and they talked about how they now walk home from school instead of taking the bus, how they got their parents involved. They told their parents they need to be buying more fresh fruits and vegetables, and how their parents even started buying pedometers and got involved in the contest. And at the end of the 6 weeks, many of the kids talked about how they lost weight, and the parents talked about how they lost weight as well, even though that wasn't the focus of the contest. That was one of the initiatives. And this week, tomorrow, as I mentioned, we'll be going to Buffalo, and then following on Monday to Albany to congratulate the winners. So I haven't really had a chance to talk to them personally about their experiences. But I am hearing that many of the teachers who were involved in the contest as well, with the kids encouraging them, got a team together and rallied around this initiative and started eating healthy and exercising more as well.
Do you see this as a program that perhaps could be replicated across more cities in the state or beyond the state to include in the country somehow?
Most definitely. Actually, this is a 2-year program. We started with upstate this year. Next year, we're focusing on the 5 boroughs, Long Island, Westchester, Orange County. But, and I also would like to get the Department of Health involved with this initiative to help us maybe track some of the results. And it's something that I would like to talk to some of the other first ladies around the country about doing in their states.
In your testimony, you also spoke of the partnership in New York with the health and education departments and the healthcare community, referencing that to the body mass index calculations that are done, the measurements that are done. That screening obviously is helpful in getting results. Can you cite any discrepancies or disparities that might have been portrayed by that screening? Were there areas of target that you think would?
Well, I'm not really aware of right now. I know we have a lot of community schools that have nurses in their schools and a health center in their schools, and we're trying to get them involved more with the BMI testing, but that's something that we will have to work on with the Department of Health.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Stallings, you made mention of the simplification of the menu planning and monitoring processes. Can you just elaborate a bit on that, especially with the monitoring program, and how that, what you think needs to be improved upon?
Well, again, as I mentioned, what I can speak to is in our Phase 1 report, we've taken a great deal of time to try to understand the challenges at the food service directors level and in the schools. And there are a number of opportunities, I think, to make this more simple. As I said, right now, there are 2 different approaches, and really 2.5 approaches to putting your menu plan out and getting it monitored. Those could be simplified and allow then the food service people to focus on things, planning that will result in the kind of nutrient and food patterns we want. We've also heard through testimony and looking at the reports from the USDA that currently the monitoring and the goals of the program aren't completely synchronized. And again, it's partly because this has been updated intermittently since the late 40s. And what we have the opportunity to do with this community, with our committee, is to look at this thoroughly. We have a number of committee members who serve on the ground level, and I can attest that they are very appropriately vocal to make sure we keep thinking about both the rules being simple, easy to understand, what kind of labels we might need to make that work, not being dependent on high skill sets in every setting, because across the country that's not necessarily the work environment. And then the issues of how we take those and also continue to understand what children want to eat and will eat, and turn those, if you will, our cultural food patterns for children into more healthful diets. And we believe we've got a committee together that can address all of those operational issues and ultimately work with industry. As we've been told both when I was working on the WIC program and this, from an industry point of view, if we can provide well-substantiated recommendations that the government would endorse, that helps them actually to produce new and helpful products for the school setting. It's a really big market. I think we have a really great opportunity to engage them around some of these issues. So they want a level playing field. They want to know what they should aim for.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me there was like a 3E repetition here today: the exercise, the eating right, and the education. That kind of equals the soundness of an outcome. Across the board, I would ask you, which of those 3 E's do you think is the weakest link that perhaps needs the most addressing?
Well, thank you. Thank you. That is an incredibly important question, and not to diminish the importance of any of the 3 of those, because I agree they're all absolutely critical. But we know from, if you will, the energy balance literature and experience that we have to deal with the food side of it first, because you can easily it is very hard to exercise enough to overcome overeating. It's very easy to overeat. And just the calories per intake an hour of activity. So there are very important things to the physical activity, including fitness, as well as burning calories, and the evidence supports that, some kids learn better in that environment. Education is very important, but we also know from extensive experience that education does not always change behavior. And what we have to do is keep working towards that. But, and I'll step back now as a pediatrician and a community member, the opportunity to make the school a very special place for food. I mean, it's a special place for learning, but the idea of making it a special place for what food's available in that environment, which does represent about 50% of eating opportunities, is, I think, the keystone. That's not to detract from the importance of physical activity, which has been well demonstrated, and absolutely nutrition continues to need to be a part of the curriculum, but we can't rely on those other two pieces to be effective against really overeating and obesity. And we know that from studies in children and adults of all ages.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
Well, sir, I guess our concern is that while schools provide a great opportunity for partnerships, that we all recognize that, again, it's the education, it's the commitment of families and communities to support that, so that we too believe that nutrition has to be part of our school day, and improved nutrition is very, very important. We want to be sure that whatever happens today is also accompanied and supported by the total life and lifestyle of our children, or else it just simply will not work.
Were you going to say something else, Doctor?
Just to follow up on that, again, recognizing that it's a complex environment, but there's virtually no other opportunities where we could impact healthful eating at that level, and that doesn't in any way, 50% of the food or the eating opportunity. And that doesn't in any way limit the other opportunities outside the school environment, where the parents are really often at the child's side or making decisions about what to bring into the house or the food eating. So again, as a pediatrician and an advocate, I would say that we have a more unique opportunity in school, but it is meant in no ways to limit the freedom and the opportunities for families to make other decisions in other settings. Families are not aware often of what their children are eating in schools. They're often not aware of what's in the vending machines or the snack bar. And if you go to the evidence that was prepared in that first report about competitive foods, I think that walks through the behavioral issues you brought up, that this is an opportunity, but it's in no way meant to take away the authority of the parents or those many, many other opportunities at nights and on weekends and holidays. Thank you.
If I could just toss a final question out there in terms of how it relates, all of this relates to agriculture. I know there have been some programs, I've assisted some in the state of New York, where we take perhaps damaged produce that may not be marketable, but is certainly edible. Is there a way to stretch the opportunities here to reach our schools with locally produced, so that we're addressing the energy delta, the energy input that's so important these days because of the energy it takes to import or ship in from other regions of the country, our food sources? Is there a way to stretch the opportunity with our ag community to provide wholesome nutrition for our children?
Well, I'll be happy to start on that. One of the things that, again, our committee has learned a lot about is the Commodity Foods Program and the Department of Defense Fruits and Vegetable Program. And I'd like to compliment our public servants, and most of what we thought of as the Commodity Foods Program when all of us were growing up is substantially different. And I believe that we have partners there that can address some of the very things you're talking about, because their purchasing power and their transportation opportunities are really vast. So as we've gone about collecting information, I believe that's an opportunity as well, that the USDA and particularly the Commodities Group are very interested in being a part of the success. The other issues that you bring up are ones from a nutrition science point of view, not so much the ecology and the energy, transportation energy. What we have been learning is, yes, local and fresh and involvement with the community is a wonderful part of it, but most of us live where that would really that when things are in season, those are great partnerships. But I also want to mention the strength of the, if you will, the whole agricultural industry now. that the fruits and vegetables that are picked at prime time and frozen and canned that then are in compliance with USDA regulations to be a part of the school breakfast and lunch program are really very high quality products. And so if you had asked some of us nutritionists, again, 20 years ago, we would have said, oh, fresh fruits and vegetables sitting out on the stand are always the most nutritious. We've come to understand that's not always the case. So I'd like for the committee to bear in mind these other opportunities and purchases and money-saving opportunities are all potentially part of the solution as well. And the quality of the food served in schools is and should be, again, with this backdrop of specifications for purchase, should be as high a quality as we would have in our homes and in any other setting, which is what we would want for schools.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I agree generally with that statement. Again, our concern is we would not want a one-size-fits-all approach because, again, in our rural communities and some of our suburban communities, it may be an appropriate way to do that, which may be inconsistent with some of our larger school districts that provide that do central food preparation. But I think the point is we should all be concerned with the quality of the food and ensure that there are options to local school districts and local schools in terms of how they are able to secure those products.
Mr. Polis?
Oh, I think the First Lady was going to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to mention that at the Executive Mansion in Albany, New York, we're going to start inviting school kids to come to the mansion and have the executive chef there teach them how to make some healthy meals. We also have a garden at the mansion where every year we invite children to come in and help us plant fruits and vegetables and herbs at the mansion.
Speaking as a gardener, I will tell you, if you get kids involved in gardening and growing their vegetables, it's a lot easier to get them to eat them.
I think, Madam Chair, too, if I might just conclude with this, it's important for us to not deal just in silos because we're dealing with wonderful dynamics here for our children and across the board nutrition, but there is that energy quotient that's involved, too, and if we can begin to do smarter things as energy consumers by buying locally and buying fresh, you know, we can incorporate several dynamics of policy into one package, and that big picture view, I think, is so critically important to progressive policy development.
And we're probably going to go on to a second round. So because we were so late in staying, excuse me, we understand time restraints and everything else. We're very used to that, and especially for the First Lady. If you need to leave or anyone needs to leave, we understand that. You're not insulting us at all. But we do have more questions, and if you'd like to stay, we'd love to ask them. Mr. Polis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent the state of Colorado, which has some of the lowest obesity rates in the country, but like a lot of other states, it's heading in the wrong direction. Today, more than 1 in 10 Colorado children is obese, and this not only affects their health, but very important to us as a committee and our Congress, it affects their achievement in their education. A study of 5th graders found that those with a poor diet, too much fat and refined sugar, and not enough fruits, vegetables, and whole grains were from 26 to 41% more likely to fail standardized reading and writing tests than their peers who consumed healthier diets. Healthy habits start early in life, and the public overwhelmingly supports immediate action to reverse the obesity trend. According to a poll of people in Colorado by the Colorado Health Foundation, 86% of Coloradans support requiring 30 minutes of physical education each day in our schools, even if it takes time away from other subjects, and 82% support efforts to remove snacks of low nutritional value from snack vending machines, an issue that I worked on while I was on the State Board of Education in Colorado, and replacing them with healthy snacks. My first question is for Ms. Copperman. What are some of the challenges that you found in creating and implementing strong wellness policies throughout the United States? What are some of the biggest challenges to both creating those policies as well as successfully implementing them?
Okay, I can speak to the New York State experience in conjunction with the audit that was done by the state controller looking at physical education, now nutrition, is that there seems to be a lack of monitoring and evaluation, and that's what came out of the physical education requirements, that the requirements were there, but that the monitoring wasn't there to kind of look and see that the legislation that was already enacted was actually being followed. And I think with the wellness policies, it tends to be the same thing, is that if schools aren't meeting their physical education, then when you go to the wellness policies, they have these policies and they've sat down and they've developed them, but there's really not been a way of looking at the implementation and the monitoring of the goals and whether these goals are actually being successful in what they're doing. And I can say that when we went to the school districts and asked them, what would you like to do to prevent obesity in schools, we gave them a choice. And you know, they felt that there was a support of somewhat for nutrition. They felt that there could be more education support and, again, monitoring and following, but they felt that the physical activity goals were completely unsupported because they weren't meeting the physical education requirements, and that's why they asked us to focus on physical activity. One of the things we did is that we understand that physical activity, and as a registered dietitian by training, physical activity goes hand in hand with nutrition. So what we tried to do was to kind of take nutrition ideas and integrate them with physical activity with curriculum subjects. And what we found is by doing that, that's what helped us overcome the barrier of getting it going and implemented in the classroom, which was the major problem that the schools had.
And that's kind of leads into my second question. With all the interest to improve the school food environment, clearly nutrition education is part of that, to really integrate nutrition education into the classroom and the entire campus, whether it's in the cafeteria or the history class or wherever appropriate. And it seems to me that this should be part of the education reform movement more broadly. And I'm wondering what ideas you might have about how we can approach and impress others with the merits of nutrition education from a broader lens in these systemic reform discussions.
Yes, I think several things are important. Number one, the school environment is a place where children spend 10 months out of the year. So all their formative years are basically spent more time in school than at home. So I think it offers us a wonderful opportunity to provide education. I think what winds up happening is that it becomes not coordinated, that there aren't the resources or the national support that enable the schools to take a program that has best practices and shown it's been successful and actually implement it into the classrooms and into the cafeteria and into the physical education classes and into the PTA and into the whole environment of the school. So I think what's needed is really looking at best practices and offering the schools programs that work, because there are a lot of programs that are out there and that have been proposed by different groups, but when you go to evaluate what's needed, and I think that's the second part of it, is that there needs to be some sort of support that allows the schools the awareness to the program and the implementation that is within budget. We would all like to see the Cadillacs and very expensive programs come in, but the schools really cannot afford that. So I think it needs to be what we found in ActivityWorks: targeted, simple, economical, and utilizing what the schools have. So I think those are the nutrition education programs that would be effective.
Thank you. I have one more question, Madam Chair, if I may, for Mr. Felton. According to the Colorado Children's Campaign Survey, which is a nonprofit focused on education policy in Colorado, our current Lieutenant Governor is former executive director of that organization. They did a survey of 22 of our largest school districts in Colorado. Only 3 of them require nutritional standards for all school snacks for children. So given that reality in my state and also the reality nationally, why do you think school districts will remove junk foods from schools without federal or state legislation requiring that they meet nutritional standards?
Well, I think our concern is that as communities are more engaged and understand the value of nutrition, that they're certainly willing to move toward that direction. It is not that any school district or school wants to say they don't want their children to be knowledgeable about nutrition, or that they want to have healthy foods within that school day. But I think that if we look at schools, its primary role, of course, as we know, is to deliver quality education. But there is a business aspect of schools, and they need to be sure that they can balance all of these requirements. If we look at, for example, how we evaluate school performance, we're looking primarily at, our students doing well in 3 areas. When schools and school districts have very limited budgets, that's where they focus their attention. So I don't think it's an issue of not wanting to meet standards. The question is it realistic in every situation? And again, our concern is that if there is a federal law that provides for some mandated standards, that there is at least some relief valve so that we understand in some cases where it doesn't work, there's another approach without now being labeled as not in compliance and therefore a poor school.
Yeah, and I would just submit that, not only in Colorado, but in other states, it simply hasn't happened at the district level, which I think is why there's a very legitimate discussion about these kinds of guidelines at the federal level and indeed in many states as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Platts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Felton, I'd maybe pick up there a little bit. In your testimony, you talked about the concern that the School Board Association has about restrictions could reduce revenues to schools that help pay for activities, extracurricular activities. In our colleague's testimony at the beginning, she talked about a study done by the CDC and Department of Agriculture that showed that revenues actually went up as schools engaged in providing healthier opportunities as opposed to losing revenues. Have you, the School Board Association, looked at that study? Are you familiar with it and have a response regarding the findings of that study?
Yes, sir. We are familiar with the study. For the most part, the focus has been on, do schools lose money in terms of their vending machines? And there's been enough data, mixed reporting, but certainly there isn't the significant loss in revenues in vending machines. Our concern is that the proposed legislation would seek to restrict all foods sold on any related school activity. So, for example, if we think about as I said earlier, the local field trip to New York, and the community is able to get a sponsor who will provide boxed lunches for those students. If those boxed lunches aren't in compliance with the new standards of food served and sold during the school day, then local school districts, for example, could find themselves potentially in litigation because they have not complied. Or, for example...
But there'd be nothing prohibiting the school or from saying, hey, we appreciate that support, here are the guidelines if you can work with us.
Oh, certainly,
right.
Certainly.
I would tell you, I'm not convinced, and I haven't taken a position on Lynn's legislation because I'm torn between local control, school districts, and elected school board members in Pennsylvania having a say versus me telling them what they have to do on this issue. But there do seem to be some ways you could address that concern and still comply with the law if it was adopted.
Oh, certainly, and many states voluntarily are moving toward establishing their own standards that are very, very strong because they have the commitment of local communities that are willing to say, not only are we committed to nutrition, stronger nutrition policies, we're willing to pay for whatever's necessary to ensure that, as we heard earlier, it's properly implemented and evaluated. And where communities have that kind of support, it works. What our fear is that if it simply becomes another federal mandate without fully understanding all the operational aspects within a local community and school district, then we could find ourselves having some unintended consequences.
Yeah.
If I may add just a minute, I'm from the Center for Weight and Health, who did one of those studies that was mentioned earlier. And what we actually found, and we didn't look at field trips, but foods sold not only in vending, but in all other aspects besides the school meal and the school breakfast. So that could include a la carte foods.
Would that include like football game sales, that type of thing too?
It did not include football game sales because those are outside of the school day, but anything sold within the school day, including vending, but not exclusively of vending. What we found is that when you limit those, what we call competitive foods, the worry was that then there would be a lot less money coming into the school and into food service and into the clubs, et cetera, that use those foods for fundraising. What they found was that the bottom line in terms of the school was actually a net positive because more kids participated in the school meal. And when more kids participate in the school meal, the revenues go up. So, like I said, we didn't look at fundraising in terms of outside of the school day, and we didn't look at field trips and that sort of thing. But in the school day, the net result is that schools are not losing money, at least in our study, that they are staying in the red, and in fact, they're getting more in the red because of the increase in the school meal participation.
Yep. Yeah, I think one of the, if children and adults, if we provide healthy alternatives, it's all the more likely we'll embrace them. I'm a perfect example. I'm a sweet tooth fanatic, and my wife, this morning when I left the house at about 10:05 to be down here early for a school group, I made a point of grabbing some celery she had soaking in water to give it a little crisper that I ate on my drive down here. I commute from my district in Pennsylvania each day, and so I was eating some delicious celery because my wife made it available and right there waiting. So I opened that fridge, I saw it. And crunchy, yeah.
Makes you eat celery, and she breastfeeds. What a perfect wife.
My wife puts me to shame, as my staff will tell you, when it comes to fitness and healthy eating. So
I was also going to add, and I'm happy to share this with the committee at a later date, but we have at the Center for Weight and Health done a very comprehensive review of what works best across all different sectors, so not only in the school, not only in programs like WIC, but at work sites, at community-based interventions, looking at the real science as opposed to what people think or are hypothesizing might happen. And while, of course, I'm a researcher, so I always say we need more studies to base our conclusions upon, what we did come to conclude as a base of, again, looking at all of these different sectors, was that it's the marriage between the education and the policy and environmental supports that really make the difference. So as Nancy Copperman was saying, when you integrate the education with the policy and environmental supports is when you really see change. So you were asking whether it's the education or the PE or the nutrition. It's really both, intertwined, integrated, and coordinated, so that a child can go to class and hear the message, I need to eat more fruits and vegetables, and then go to the cafeteria and see a fresh salad bar with lots of fruits and vegetables. When those messages aren't coordinated is when we get into trouble, and then the nutrition education by itself doesn't work, the policy isn't so helpful, but when they're combined is when we see.
I saw that, and I'll wrap up here quickly. I represent a lot of apple orchards and promoting apples as a healthy snack, and there's an annual apple promotion week where in schools they do the Great Apple Crunch program, I think is what it's called. I guest served in the cafeteria that week, and one of the options was fresh apple slices, and it was wonderful to see the kids enjoying them, and I'll take his if he doesn't want them. It's promoting it and tying in. They did a program in the school tied into the product being offered, so it was education along with the opportunity for the kids to have that as part of lunch.
Right, kids really learn by experiential opportunities, and I was going to add, we also have a review, not that we did this one, but one that I have that shows the farm to school movement, and again, we don't have a lot of studies on it, but it is showing that it does increase children's fruits and vegetable intake, and that combination of being exposed to local produce plus having the experience with it is probably what's contributing to that success. And I'm very excited about the new WIC food package and the new alignment with the education, because that's exactly what we're talking about. Providing fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, all of the things that we know people should be eating, along with the education that supports it. So we're really excited about evaluating that in the upcoming year and years.
And if I could, Madam Chair, one final comment about the importance of this issue, because our focus has been about kids, but one of my colleagues, I think earlier, it might have been Mr. Castle, mentioned about how kids end up teaching adults, and he used the seatbelt example. I'm a perfect example of that, me learning from my kids, because one of the things, my children do get snacks, but thanks to my wife, healthier, more so than my eating habits of the past. But one thing they still don't have at age 10 and 12 is they still don't get soda at all. and never have. And I used to drink about a case of soda a week. And sitting at the dinner table, all my commuting, I was always drinking the caffeine and not good soda, or not that there's necessarily good or bad, but sitting at the dinner table, I had a glass of soda, and my then 4.5, 5-year-old said, "Well, Dad, if it's bad for us, why do you drink so much?" That was about 4.5, 5 years ago. Well, no, almost 6 years now, and I went cold turkey that week, and so my kids taught me, by them being healthy, they ended up influencing me. So what you're doing won't just benefit the children, as we know from seatbelts. It will ultimately benefit the parents too, because the kids developing those healthy eating habits can help their parents complement what they're doing with their children. So all the more how important your work is, and thank you for all of your testimonies and work day in and day out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
May I also point out, you can see the opposite happen. So no, we no longer have soda in California schools, but I have talked to many parents who said, well, my kids get soda at school, so it must be good for you. So that's an example of how the school can set a tone for both positive and not so positive education around foods.
And again, from our perspective, we agree that schools provide that opportunity. Our concern is that we must look at not only the school environment, but the work environment and what happens in the community, and together we can address this issue.
I've already used up my time. And then some.
Well, no, we're actually very lucky on this committee because we both tend to agree that we'd like to expand, if possible, among the, just the usual 5 minutes. I feel bad when people travel from all over the country to sit down in front of us for 5 minutes and then it's over. So being that no one here seems to be complaining about leaving, we are going to shut it up soon, though, because we're going to have votes again. What I'd like to, and I know my colleague wants to ask another question. I happen to believe very strongly that, when I think about what has been mandated in some states or whatever, children wearing helmets when they ride bicycles or roller skating, teaching children not to smoke. Let me tell you, they have the most powerful effect on adults. If, I get on a bicycle with my grandchildren, where's your helmet? Now, I never wore a helmet in my life. I had to go out and buy a helmet, mainly because they were right. And I think it's going to be the same with nutrition. If we can bring good nutrition into the schools, and I don't particularly like any kind of unfunded mandate to go down to anywhere. I believe in, I'm looking at this as a nurse. We need to look at our school children, which unfortunately across this nation, they are overweight. Mm-hmm. This has become a country, and our life differences, they are different. When we were young, you were out of the house at 9 a.m. and your mom said, be back by dinner. Now, it was different days. I agree with that. But we're competing now with kids watching TV, kids being on their computers, the games that they're on. So they're spending a lot of time inside. And I think that that is not the best and healthiest thing in the world to do. So what we're trying to do on a number of ways is educate the children on nutrition, get them more active into physical activity. And that brings me up to a question, and I'll throw it out there. We've been talking about, a lot of the children, but no one's talking about those children with special needs, those children that are in a wheelchair. They can do exercise, but they also need good nutrition. So if you have any data on any of the work that you've done with children with special needs, I think that, the committee needs to hear about that also.
Well, let me speak to that a little bit. In fact, one of the areas that I've worked on for years is children with cerebral palsy, and across the spectrum from mildly affected to quite severely affected for ambulation and cognitive issues. And I think you're correct in the issues in those children, because they are not running around and riding the bike and that sort of thing. There is a decrease in total energy needs. And the milder the defect, probably the more we'll see that difference. In children who are severely affected, the interesting thing is they are feeding those children is so difficult that some of the most striking examples of malnutrition and undernutrition are children with cerebral palsy who have spastic quadriplegia and that sort of thing. So part of the challenge in a school setting is now often you have a very big spectrum of children with special needs. I think the schools, again, with some of the recommendations, because there will be a section on children with special needs, the focus, as you mentioned, really is around calories. Most of the other nutritional needs don't change very much as long as you adjust them for body size. So if they're overweight, we know a bit about that, but certainly if they're underweight. Many of the other children with special needs in a school setting are children with medical problems that aren't the same as the visible disabilities. And for those children in the current environment, the system of having them known by the school and by the food service people is part of the program. Now, whether they're able to meet their needs as well with the current recommendations, I don't think we have any evidence for. So in summary, the energy issue is a big deal, and the physical activity component, like you said, we've learned from both children and from the elderly, the kind of physical activity you can do from sitting and that sort of thing. Those are all areas we can improve. But I think within the food, school, lunch and breakfast program, and the professional oversight that's there and the commitment of the teams you've already got on the ground, as long as we have good clarity about what the conditions are, it should go more directly to the amount of food, which is calories, and then the texture or special feedings. And as long as we make a commitment that those children will be educated in those school buildings, the issue around food and physical activity should be paired with that.
I'd just like to add a couple of comments. In our work with Activity Works, it wasn't designed specifically for children with special needs, but it has been used in classrooms with children with severe learning disabilities. And it was quite interesting to see that the teachers' feedback felt that the kids were moving, exercising, and learning, and it increased their listening skills. And the repetition, they used it differently, was very helpful, and they felt it would work. I do have, in one of my schools, a child who's in a wheelchair. And this child, they have a mat set up in the back of the class. And when Activity Works comes on, he goes down on the mat. And he does all the exercises that the kids are doing from the upper body. And it's just accepted in something that they do. And in the audits for New York State physical education requirements, they found that the one thing that they were meeting was really providing physical education for this population. In my practice as a clinical nutritionist dealing with overweight and obese children for 20 years, I can tell you that my interaction with schools dealing with children that were overweight and obese and educating the schools on what's appropriate was very successful in helping those children do well in school, change the nutrition that they were receiving in school. Many times when you have a child with special needs, the idea is that food is love, and that overfeeding is doing the children a favor. And that was one of the things that I was able to do, was to educate and work with teachers and looking at foods as rewards in special needs schools, and changing things and actually making the kids healthier and actually functioning better and being able to do the activity. Another case would be children that have psychological issues that are required to be on medications that can make them gain 20 to 30 pounds in a year. And they need these medications, otherwise they can't function. So what do we do with this population, which is increasing? And again, working with the families and using nutrition and physical education strategies to help change and work with the schools. So I think that it's a partnership of using nutrition professionals and using physical therapists and bringing the team together to deal with this and setting up programs and awareness in the schools that they can help. And I've seen that been successful, in my career and in working with Activity Works and seeing how they're increasing their activity.
We think that obviously schools have come a long way in terms of both the academic preparation for students with disabilities and providing free appropriate education, as well as dealing with other kinds of services like nutrition. So I don't think it is an issue of well, we will not deal with these students because we aren't aware. I think as Ms. Copperman has pointed out, there is the opportunity to collaborate on what is needed for each child, and even for those students that aren't formally identified as being disabled, there's a wide, broad range of skill sets and learning that takes place. So as we all know, it's a very, very complex issue. The key for us is that the political will, both at the community level, state and federal level, to do that, and do they have the resources and the appropriate development for teachers and other staff officials so that it works as a total program and not viewed as add-ons.
Mr. Tonkus? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did somebody else want to answer?
I just wanted, since I haven't spoken for a while, I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying about the children. And part of being a nurse as well, I realized that, we have to start with the children, and then they take that information home to their parents. And we also do adult wellness in businesses, so that, we have to complete the circle. But never underestimate the power of a child and how they can influence parents and grandparents.
Madam Chair, if I might, the craze of late is high energy drinks. Loaded with caffeine, loaded with sugar, and they sound good. They sound harmless. They sound like they're going to build up your opportunity to perform. What do we need to do? Because so much of this is being ingested by the young crowd because they think it's the cool thing to do or a good thing to do. How do we deal with this?
If I may start, in the report on the competitive foods, there is a whole section that looked at beverages very systematically. And in that evidence review, if you look at caffeine, and as of course we all know, caffeine is a drug. It has physiological impact with heart rate, with changes in metabolism, including glucose metabolism. And yes, it is performance enhancing. It's a performance enhancing drug. So, I know that in a military setting, they've gone through this and found opportunities to use this. And maybe we might want our airline pilot to have his caffeine. But if you read through the report, I think you'll come away after looking at the evidence that this is a drug. It's not appropriate in the school setting. And as the committee described, having a performance-enhancing drug in the school setting, again, goes against everything we're trying to provide there. So in that setting, what this committee came out with is the beverages that are appropriate in school would not have caffeine, would not have any other special enhancements, including adding vitamins and minerals, because the committee recommended that the focus be on foods and healthful foods and beverages, not the idea that you put a vitamin in a sport drink or something like that. The one other issue about sports drinks being a little different from the high energy, which are really highly caffeinated, the evidence again supports that, except in very special situations where kids are in team sport type training settings in hot environments or very humid environments, there's no evidence to support the need for rehydration fluids in the school setting in the non-competitive settings. So the idea that you might have sport drinks for the varsity teams during practice and performance comes in the idea of safety and in the domain of the coach and looking at the whole environment. The idea of having those beverages in the school during the normal day or in the gym near, after you've had PE class, again, the committee did a lot of work to provide the evidence that does not support the necessity of those in that setting. They're high in sodium, high in calories, high in caffeine, depending on which ones you're looking at. So they may have a place in other settings, but the committee would suggest that's not the school.
Well, we're promoting these drinks, and
right.
the young mentality is just consuming them.
Right, and again,
at a dangerous level.
The evidence that's come out with the impact of the media on being able to influence food and beverage decisions in children as young as 5 and 6 is very, very compelling. And so we know that if kids are exposed to that kind of media attention, then it's effective, and they do begin to make decisions based on that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to add that one of the reasons for our recommendation to coordinate the nutrition education messages across the federal food programs is because of some of what you just brought up, that kids are bombarded with messages that tell them to do the opposite thing of eating healthy and being physically active. The average child sees 5,000 commercials on television a day, 90+% of which are for unhealthy foods. We have to find ways to counteract that. And I also add, in regards to your discussion about sweetened beverages, that we published a book, our center, called Obesity, Dietary and Developmental Influences, which examines all the evidence on a lot of dietary factors in terms of which are contributing to obesity and which may not be. And sweetened beverages came up right at the very top of the list.
And we're also dealing with a struggle that many districts have where there are enticements to put in machines that are selling high sugar in liquid formats through drinks, unhealthy snack food, and getting lights on a field, bleachers put on a field, athletic fields paid for, and everybody's saying, well, it's the resource we get, and we need to keep. What's the cost of doing that into the future?
Exactly.
When we're growing unhealthy kids, the price tag to society is far beyond the benefit, I think, that comes in the beginning. So how do we address that?
But I think it goes again back to the, what is the political will? And
Political will versus consequences, though.
That's true, but 20 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, we may not have envisioned a smoke-free environment. And yet, we have in many states now smoke-free environments because
okay, I'm sorry.
Because there was, one, not only the support for incentives to move in that direction, but again, the commitment and engagement of people who said this is the right thing to do. I mean, if you look at our age, if you look 40 years ago, when people were throwing trash out the windows on highways, I mean, we create a model and we create a value in this country which will then drive this behavior. I just think we have to be very, very careful. Sure, the feds want to push this thing, and it's very, very important, but just keep in mind that many local communities are working with that. And to the extent that the feds can provide leverage so that states and local communities can move at a much more accelerated pace, I think is very important and should not be discounted.
I hear you, but I think at the same time the enticements are pushing us backward, can push us backward rather than move us forward, or even hold us where we're at.
I would think this would be a wonderful opportunity for school boards to really look at their school districts and say exactly what you were saying is, what's more important, putting lights on our field or having, a third of our children be obese? And I'll tell you, if you put soda in schools, they wanted to put a soda machine in the health education center. And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we have water. We have a water machine, but unfortunately it says Coke, the machine says Coke. But we have to, sometimes you just have to take a tough stance.
Well, I think, again, it is ensuring that the values of a community are well respected and are influenced so that we can have sustained programs, not just the point. The Friday night games at some of our communities, Friday night football is a major part of that core society. Now, it's easy for us to say, get rid of the Friday night games because we don't have bleachers. I think that local community ultimately will make that choice about what's best for their kids, and they should.
I'm sorry, but I have to call this to an end. We have a vote. I just want to say that last year, after we had a hearing, one of our first hearings on nutrition, we heard from a lot of the manufacturers, and they understood that they needed to step up to the plate a little bit more. Now, with that being said, are they there yet? No. But do you notice more of the snacks are now in smaller bags, 100 calories? So we're getting there. It's an education of not only of the schools, not only of the general public, but also the manufacturers. Hopefully, we will continue to work with the manufacturing companies. They are putting in water into the machines. Airports are carrying more and more water. Now we just got to figure out how we're going to drink all that water without, unfortunately, too many bottles all over the place. New York is going to probably start charging 5 cents even now for the water bottles. So we have a long way to go, but you know what? We'll get there. I want to thank everybody here for their testimony. We do have our work cut out. I'm going to bypass my closing statement if nobody minds. As previously sorted, members will have 14 days to submit additional materials for the hearing record. Any member who wishes to submit follow-up questions in writing to the witness should coordinate with the majority staff within the requested time. Without objection, this hearing is adjourned.